Hey, welcome to Checkerhead Brewing. I'm David Aiken. I am the brewer and conspirator behind the beers here. I'm going to talk to you today about the importance of making a yeast starter for your beer, because if you get good yeast health, your fermentation is going to be that much better and you're going to get a better beer as a result. Now you're going to need a few things to make this happen. You're going to need, number one, an Erlenmeyer flask. I use a 2-liter Erlenmeyer flask for my brews, which are typically in the 5 to 7 gallon range, or the 19 to 30 liters, give or take. You're going to need a small stir bar that looks like that. That goes at the bottom of the Erlenmeyer flask. Then you need some kind of airlock. I use just a piece of foam so that contaminants can't get into the Erlenmeyer flask itself. And then you need some kind of stir plate. Now you can get a professional one, or you can do what I did, which is take a cigar box, get a computer fan and a couple of little magnets and glue it all together and wire it up with a little motor and a transformer. You can see plugged into the wall over there. Then what you want to do is check this out. That little bar attaches to the magnets that are inside the box, and then when you turn it on, that little bar spins around and around and around. Now when there's liquid in the Erlenmeyer flask, that creates a vortex, and that vortex draws oxygen into the liquid, giving yeast the oxygen it needs to propagate and give you a really healthy fermentation. Now, I'm going to start making the little small batch of beer, which involves just basically dry malt extract boiled on the stove for about 10 minutes. I'll do that. And then we'll put it all together along with the yeast that I've got in my fridge, and you'll see how it's all done. All right, so I got my dry malt extract. This is just a bag of Golden Light, so I use that for most of the batches I make. I've got a small measuring cup and I've got a small scale. Now I'm going to measure out about 125 grams for the 2-liter batch that I'm going to make, so let's make it happen. All right, measuring cup, I'm going to get 2 liters of water in the pot, and we're going to boil it up, add the dry malt extract, and then we'll have our little mini batch of beer that we're going to add our yeast to as well. The water in the sink here is being filtered through a system like a charcoal filter underneath, so it's no impurities, and we're on a well here, so the well water is a great source of just good clean water without any chlorine or anything that's going to be detrimental to the flavor of the beer. Let's stick it on, turn it on, and make it happen. I'll rush through this so you don't have to watch a pot boil, but you'll get the idea. And dry malt extract. I read somewhere once that the ancients would make beer and mead and things like that, and they never really understood how the fermentation worked, so they always had a magic stick. And what some people think is that there was yeast or things that were sort of held within that stick, so that when they made it, those yeasts and stuff actually contributed to the actual fermentation happening. So I've got my special magic stick that I use when I'm making my dry malt extract work, and we're going to use this right now so that we have a fantastic ferment. Now, after every batch of beer I make, I harvest yeast and I keep it in a tiny little mason jar. And then I just stick it in the fridge so that it cools the metabolism of the yeast down and it keeps it as healthy as possible. Now, when you're going to start doing your yeast starter, you want to bring this up to room temperature so that the yeast actually is a little bit more ready to get going and ready to work with the dry malt extract that you're creating this mini batch of beer. Now this yeast is kind of cool because what I did was I took honey from our 2019 honey harvest. I diluted it until the wild yeast in that honey could actually ferment the sugars that were in the liquid. And then I grew it up with a yeast starter like this, and to try to actively promote that yeast culture so that it was big enough to actually do things with. And then I did it again. So there was enough of that culture so that yeast from the honey could actually ferment a whole batch of beer. So we're going to use it again, and we'll get this happening. Now, when the dry malt extract gets to the boil, I set a timer for 10 minutes, and I got to be careful right now because there's a good chance that it could boil over. But we're looking pretty good. I turned the temperature down just a tiny bit, And I have a timer set for 10 minutes. So we'll come back when this is done and I'll show you the next part of the procedure. Okay, so our 10 minutes are done. I'm gonna take the pot off of the stove, which is just over there, and I'm gonna put it into here. This is a ice bath. I've got a little tiny tub that's exactly the right size to fit the pot. So lid goes on the pot. And then pot goes in the ice bath. And I like keeping the yeast right by it so that when the two are ready to go, we're going to sanitize everything and then put it into the Erlenmeyer flask, throw that onto the stir bar, and get it spinning so that it's ready for tomorrow. Okay, so I took the pot, I put it in the ice. The ice bath cooled down the dry malt extract wort. I've got my yeast here from the fridge that's also warmed up to room temperature. What I'm going to do is this bucket is full of Star San, liquid with a sanitizer in it. We're going to make sure everything that is going to touch the wort from this point forward is sanitized, much like you do with an actual batch of beer. And that way the yeast won't get infected by anything from outside, and the yeast starter will get this yeast really active and really going for tomorrow's batch of beer. Now, inside the bucket, we also have the Erlenmeyer flask, the stir bar, and the little foam top that goes on to keep infection out. And we're going to dip this also in this because as we open it up, we want to make sure that everything has been sanitized. Anything that could potentially cause infection has been actually sanitized. And I'm going to use the lid of this bucket just to hold on to things as we move them over to the sink, where I'm going to do the actual transfer of the wort into the Erlenmeyer flask, and then add the yeast, let it spin away, and we'll see the vortex form and make it all happen. All right, so we're at the sink, and we've got all the elements that are important. We've got the yeast, we've got a funnel that's going to go into the Erlenmeyer flask to make sure everything goes in smoothly. Stir bar goes inside the Erlenmeyer flask. Now I'm going to decant most of the liquid off of the yeast so that we just get a little bit of that slurry that's at the bottom there. We get that into the actual Erlenmeyer flask so that everything moves smoothly. Just open it up, pour off the top. I like to leave a little bit of liquid in it, stir it up. Yeast goes in next. Then the wort that was made from the dry malt extract gets poured in next. And then the plug goes in last. Now, a little bit of the foam came over the top, so I'm going to get a rag right now. I'm going to wipe it off so that the flask itself isn't covered in sticky ooey gooey when we put it onto the stir plate. But that's easy enough to do. Now the next step is to try to get the magnet that's in the stir bar and the bar that's there, to find the magnets that are in the box that holds the magnets here as well. Go, heard the click. Yeast is spinning up nicely, and there's a lot of foam at the top right now, but within about 2 or 3 minutes that foam is going to disappear and we'll just have a nice clear liquid at the top. There'll be a vortex from the stir bar that's pulling oxygen into the wort itself, and then over the course of about 12 to 15 hours or so, another set of foam will be developing at the top, and that's the actual fermentation of this tiny little batch of beer. Once that's in place, then you've got a really healthy, active yeast starter for your batch of beer, and I'm going to take some pictures of it tomorrow so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so we're a little bit further along the process now. The actual stir plate over here is spun up, and I'm going to pull this off for just a sec so you can see the white ring of foam at the top. That white ring of foam right there, that's the beginning of the fermentation, and that bubble in the middle is just, again, a sign of the fermentation that's happening. We're going to now take this yeast starter And I'm going to show you a little pro trick here. Somebody showed me this and it was great. So there's a stir bar at the bottom of the Erlenmeyer flask, and if you take a small magnet and you put it onto where that stir bar is, it holds the stir bar in the Erlenmeyer flask so that when you pitch the yeast into the beer you've just made into the wort, it stays, the bar stays in the bottom of the flask, and then you don't have a bar going into the fermenter trying to find where that is later on. It's just a pain in the butt. So magnet on the bottom, the yeast has propagated and is starting to show signs of fermentation, which is great. We're going to pitch it into the wort, and we're going to have a great fermentation. Again, yeast starters, they're going to change the way you brew, and they're going to make your beers a lot better. I'm David Aiken. This is Checkerhead Brewing. We'll catch you again. Let's pitch this, shall we?